Yeah, thank you, Aswarya. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk to all of you. And I know Botany, but maybe others as well. And so, though I never met any one of you, but it's a meeting of ideas. So, what I'm going to do is um, touch on the previous farmers' movement, which erupted after the introduction of the farm laws brought in by the BJP government. And then I will go into the more recent ones, which is mainly focused on the MSP, minimum support price. But there are other issues, but it's mainly focused on that. And then I'm going to talk about more fundamental questions from a left perspective. How do we understand, the question of farming, agriculture, industrialization, socialist strategy towards these sectors and these classes emerging from these sectors. And then I'm going to talk about the era of global climate change, which is trying to put the farmer struggle in the context of that, because without that context, you can't understand. And I know that there are some people who are having debates on other forums, which I think is pretty misguided. And then I would uh, look upon the recent farmers movement, how they are responding to this, not only the MSP, but other issues as well. So, uh, and of course, there will be, I'll be very happy, more than happy to answer any questions, which especially aspects which are not covered. So to go back to the previous farmers movement in India, uh, I haven't mentioned about the European farmers movement, but I think when I talk about the more fundamental, issues concerning farming from a socialist perspective, the farmers movement in Europe will come into consideration. So to go back to the first topic about the farmers movement in the first instance, when it emerged in 2020, which was in response to three farm laws brought in by the BJP government, and the farmers movement opposed those three farm laws. And it was one of those rare movements which was able to succeed and push back the government initiative and humiliate Modi government, which was just amazing that they were able to humiliate. And I will spend a minute on actually the humiliation aspect later on. What were these farm laws? Because there is a link between what is happening now and what happened that time, even if those farm laws have gone. There were three farm laws. One was about pricing of the products, and this relates to the MSP issues. The second was about contract farming, that how agrobusiness corporations can reach contact with the individual farmers or farmers collectives, and what are the implications of that. And the third was about stocks, how much stock anyone can hold, and the law was about that all limits had been lifted, that there is no control, and this was called Essential Commodities Act, and the revision of that. And the Essential Commodities Act, when it was introduced in the 50s, was basically in a period of food shortages that the traders are not able to hold beyond a certain limit. And if they do hold beyond a certain limit, there were legal punitive actions against them. So all those limits were being lifted. And the farmers movement opposed all the three uh, uh, laws. And because I have written about this, and I'll be happy to send links to my articles on this if it's needed later on. Um, Basically, this opposition was based on this, that these farm laws, as I understood and I've written about it, they were aimed at two things. They were aimed at the incorporation of farming into the big corporate agro business, that they were looking at farming as the next sector to occupy, especially small number of industrial houses, Ambanis and Adanis, who are close to the ruling party. They were being given access through these farm laws. And one can say more or less, these farm laws were actually drafted by these corporations and presented to the government. Government just introduced it. and there is an evidence to prove that. And one of the farmer leaders, the most prominent and most sophisticated, Balbir Singh Rajibal, personally told me all the details about this in a meeting in where he was present, where this was introduced, and he posed it, and that happened in 2017. Anyway, so economically, the strategy was to bring farming under the control of these agribusiness corporations so that they control production, marketing, transportation, retailing, and holding stocks. And especially the holding stocks was more important for Adani because he was building huge silos where thousands and thousands of tons can be stored, and special transport mechanisms were being provided to him how to lift the food grains which were procured by the government and then used through trains, and special train lines were kind of constructed in order to access Modi's, Adani silos to the main rail lines. So the opposition from the farmers was very clear on the two farm laws, on the pricing, that the government is merely saying remunerative prices, which means that it is open to markets ups and fluctuations. It will lead to instability, and farmers will lose this, and they wanted a security, and so they wanted minimum support price. The about the contract farming, the opposition was that there is unequal relationship between a small farmer and a big agrobusiness corporations. And not only a small farmer, even a so-called big farmer cannot compete with the big agrobusiness corporations. Because one of the items in the contract farming was that if one of the parties reneges on the contract, for example, if a firm reaches an agreement that you have to grow rice so much or you have to grow vegetables, and we contract say that it'll be bought at this price, and later on the farm says that we are not going to buy according to the contract farming law, the farmer can sue the big agrobusiness corporations. Similarly, if the farmer does not sell to the uh, firm which it had entered a contract and tries to sell outside, the firm can sue the farmer. Now, on the face of it, looks an equal relationship that any of the affected parties can do this. But we know the nature of law in India, where leave aside a small farmer, even a big farmer is not able to compete in a legal platform. And these big agrobusiness corporations, they can hire the best lawyers in the land and pay competitive. So there was no possibility. So it was again, on face of it, looked equal, but it was loaded in the favor of big corporations. So the farmers opposed this. The Essential Commodities Act, the farmers opposed, and in some sense it was actually in the interest of urban consumers, because when the limits are lifted on holding, so a big agrobusiness corporation can hold as much as it wants. So when the harvest comes, it can procure all the food grains and then creates a artificial shortages, and then when the prices have gone up, then uploads that into the market. And since the retail units will be also controlled by one of these agrobusiness corporations, and Reliance has been expanding those retail stores, prices will go up, and it's the urban consumers who will be worst affected. And to some extent, even the poor farmers who sell their produce at the time of harvest in order to, pay back their debt and have some income to carry on their usual expenses. But after some time, they also start, you know, buying from the shops, though normally they buy from the public distribution shops. So they don't buy from the markets. And that's a crucial point, because later on it'll become clear that some of the people, even in the left, who are kind of criticizing the farmers movement, they don't understand this, that the provision of cheap food was a part of the public distribution system. So procurement was one at a minimum support price, but the distribution of that procured product at cheaper prices to low income groups was another part of that strategy. So that was being dismantled. So this was actually in the interest of both urban consumers and even the agricultural laborers and poor farmers who have to buy the produce. and the farmers were able to mobilize enormously beyond any expectation. I think the farmers unions also did not expect. There was a floodgate of sympathy with them. And one of the achievements of this movement was that even in areas of the country where there was no minimum support price, farmers became aware that there is something called minimum support price. Now, in theory, there were 23 crops on which minimum support price is given, but actually it is applied only to mainly to wheat and rice, little bit to cotton, and sometime to sugarcane in a limited fashion. And beyond that is never applied. It is in theory, but it does not work out. So farmers in South India, in East India, far away in Northeast, in Meghalaya, they became aware of this. There's something called minimum support price, and on which the government must procure, or government agencies or agencies regulated by the government must procure the price at that minimum support price. So that was one achievement. That this consciousness came all over the country. Secondly, farmers in other part of the world also came to know that farmers are capable of resisting government policies. Before that, it was a sense of subservience, sense of being defeated, sense of being powerless, helpless. That we are nothing, in in opposition either to big corporations or to the government, and governments are all powerful, and farmers have been squeezed, and but they saw that farmers are showing this remarkable resilience of that. And one of the indications of this was that Balbir Singh Rajewal personally told me that in very far off corners of the country, farmers will send a request that please send a farming leader to our region. And very interestingly, they will say, send a farming leader who has a beard and a turban, because they associated resistance to the Sikh farmers of Punjab and Haryana and Uttarakhand and Western UP. They were not all Sikh farmers, but they were led by the Sikh farmers. And the Sikh farmers were not already being led only by religious minded Sikh organization. They were also there, but also led by left wing organization. Bharatiya Kisan Union led by Ugraha, which actually has a Maoist background. And there were other uh, Krantikari Union, led by Darshan Pal. They had a Maoist background. But obviously this, because the culture, they wore Sikh symbols of. So that consciousness grew all over the country. In addition to that, people who are settled in the urban areas, many of them had memories of their, childhood, of their grandparents, and they felt emotionally touched with this movement. So there was a support from all corners of urban society, except maybe small section of urban population which was heavily under the influence of BJP and had never any contact with the farming. They probably did show some hostility, but that hostility was also hidden because the enormous strength which the farmers movement showed. Now, there are various reasons why farmers movement succeeded, but the two or three was most important. And that tells us about the mobilization strategy. One, the provision of langar, which is a cheap, free food throughout, that the government was able to, government agencies, understood this, that whatever else might happen, that farmers might suffer during the, summer season because of mosquito, and during the winter season because of the cold and possibility of COVID infection. But as long as langar is going on, food is available, this movement will be able to carry on. And this langar tradition comes from the Sikh tradition, which is centuries old. And it's not simply providing food. There is whole logistics of how you procure, raw materials, how you cook food, how you distribute this food, how you clean utensils. And they had centuries of that cumulated experience. So they were able to bring it to this. So that was one, that government knew that, as long as food is available to them, farmers will be able to carry on. And they actually saw that the food was being served, and the free food being served also meant that many poor families from surrounding areas, they will also join the langar. And so much so that even some middle class employees, they will have a free food, and then they'll take a train or bus and go to the city. So there was widespread sympathy they were able to generate. The second was that the government knew that if they use the army and the police, government could have used. It's not that government could not have used the army. They could have used the army and crush it. But they knew that there are limits to using that army and other paramilitary forces, because a large number of the soldiers or constables, soldiers in the army and constables in Central Reserve Police and Delhi Police, Haryana Police, they come from the peasantry of this region: Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, Rajasthan, Uttarakhand, and there will be certainly resentment. And government agencies had actually provided them intelligence that some of the soldiers who came on holidays from the army duty, after landing at the airport or bus stand, they will immediately go and join the protest during the holidays. So they knew that there was a sympathy. And three army chiefs actually told the government that there will be law and order situation if army and the CRP is used, because quite possibly that they will not only not obey the orders, but they might actually shoot the officers, and there will be a terrible situation. So that's another limitation on the government not being able to suppress. The third limitation was that there are groups of traditional Sikhs called Nihangs, and they are like proletariat section of the Sikh peasantry who are landless, or they leave homes and live in groups, and they keep horses. They are very good sports people, and they have come in hundreds on their horses with their traditional weapons, and they had said that if the army intervenes, we are going to fight. And the government knew that they will fight to the last, and there will be hundreds of horses will be slaughtered, and the world media will picture that, and the world media will probably be more shocked at the slaughter of the horses than the human beings. So they knew that there'll be bloodbath, and which India had never seen. And being on the outskirts of Delhi, it will be captured. Whatever limits they might impose on coverage, it'll be captured by the world media. So combination of all that led the government to uh, surrender, virtually surrender. Why I'm using the word surrender? Because Modi used the birthday of Guru Nanak and partly to appease the Sikh farmers that I'm withdrawing on this day, and so you go back home. The farmer said, we will not go back home. That we want the bill to be withdrawn in the parliament. You go to the parliament, and the BJP cadre was outraged that the prime minister's assurance is not being respected. That when prime minister of the country is giving assurance that we will withdraw the laws, they are not respecting. They are saying we will keep on staying there, and we will only move out only when it's withdrawn. So that was a humiliation which was inflicted on Modi. So he had to quickly go to the parliament and pass the laws. Only then they withdrew from the Delhi borders. So it was a tremendous victory. And I might also introduce one element, that it was also a political strategy. It was not only an economic strategy, it was also a political strategy, because this was aimed at increasing centralization, further reinforcing centralization of the management of economy and politics by weakening the power of the states. And there are provisions in the laws which clearly says state governments will not be allowed to do this. And I've written in greater detail in my papers, and I'll be happy to share those. So this was aimed at weakening federalism and increasing centralization. And centralization is absolutely central component of the Hindutva agenda. That they understand that it's only by a strong center, as powerful a center as possible, that we can impose homogenization of the country and implement our Hindutva agenda. So it was a defeat which was economic and political, both in humiliating Modi, but also defeating the agenda of centralization. Now, when the government withdrew and government surrendered, they were defeated. One of the things in admitting this defeat, they said, was that we will constitute a committee. We will look entirely on the minimum support price issue. So committee was introduced. The committee did not have very good representatives, mainly government representatives, and one or two farmers representative was introduced. But those those representatives from the farmers' organization, which were already close to the ruling party. So this MSP committee did not have any legitimacy. But even this, less than legitimate committee did not do anything. So the farmers withdrew in 2021, and now we are in 24. For 3 years, they did not do anything. They kept on holding meetings, but did not do anything. How minimum support price will be implemented. And then, MS Swaminathan, who had played a leading role in suggesting a certain formula for MSP, where he said that all the costs should be incurred, calculated, including the labor costs, which are normally not included. And plus, there should be 50% so that farmers are able to have some reasonable income. He died some few months back, and his daughter gave a wonderful speech, in his memory, and the government kind of gave him a Bharat Ratna. So the farmers' movement again kind of rejuvenated. His death rejuvenated that idea that it has been lying dormant, and this was restarted. I'll come back to this, that there are some problems with the restarting the farmers' movement, but that was the context in which this movement has been started. Uh, MS minimum support price is the central demand in this. There are other demands like some there was a bill on the electricity, which would have also put burden on the peasantry, and some repression was let loose on the peasantry, on the farmers during the period of the struggle, and some farmers were killed, and there were cases registered against them. So they all those demands, but the main demand was on the minimum support price. Now there is a misinformation which is being spread even by some of the left-wing groups, or I won't say some of them, at least one which have come to my notice, who is saying that MSP is a demand of the rich farmers and it's against the urban consumers, and because if MSP is introduced, it will lead to a rise in prices, and it's the urban consumer who will, urban poor, the industrial poor who will suffer. Now this is misleading because the food which is going to be distributed to the urban poor who are below the poverty line or near the poverty line, those who are entitled to get food grains at cheap prices through public distribution system, they will not buy the food grains at the market prices. They will buy at the public distribution. Public distribution system sells, you know, that quota of wheat and rice and pulses at those lower prices than the market prices. So the introduction of the MSP is not going to lead to, of course, some section of the middle class, will be affected, upper middle class who are not eligible to buy or access the public distribution system. But it's misleading to say that it's in general, it'll affect the prices of the products and uh, therefore the urban consumer. So this is a movement led by the rich farmers to their benefit, and it's against the interest of the urban poor. This is a misleading, empirically misleading. Of course, it will affect the profitability of the large capitalist farmers, because when food prices rise, workers do press for rising in wages, and obviously rise in wages is against the interest of the farmers, against the interest of capitalists, especially if it's not backed up by increase in productivity. I mean, slightly technical issue, that it's possible to increase wages, but still extract more surplus if you can introduce technology which can lead to increase in labor productivity. So increased labor productivity can give better wages than the previous one, but also extract more surplus from the same amount of time, and therefore more profitability. So that's where it stands. But I'm happy to expand more on that during the question answer session if someone wants. Now, the question arises now that from a left perspective, how should one look at this farmers' movement? Now, in order to look at the farmers' movement, we need to look a little bit at the economic theory and what the economic theory says, both from a right-wing perspective as well as from a left-wing perspective. The roots of the economic theory, or the basic content of the economic theory, which is shared both the left and the right, is belief in economic growth. But what we need is economic growth. We need constant increase in GDP, gross domestic product, so that if there is increase in GDP, eventually it will lead to rise in per capita income, and rise in per capita income is an indicator of standard of living, and that's how we would progress. The right wing presents this as a kind of transition which takes place in economies. That economies go through this transition from agriculture to industry to services sector, and they present you the image of the Western capitalist countries, USA, UK, Germany, France, all the European countries, Australia, New Zealand, where agriculture is a small sector of the economy, and even industry is now a small sector of the economy, and it's the services sector which is the dominant part of the economy. That this is what progress means, where per capita income has risen, and but of course, what is hidden in this is that part of this transition has been facilitated by the exploitation of the colonies. That most of these countries, UK, France, Portugal, Spain, Germany, Belgium, they are all colonial powers, and they have accumulated capital by massive exploitation of the colonies. And colonies can be compared to an agriculture. That in the way colonies were being exploited, the surplus was extracted from the colonies and invested in the rich countries. Similarly, one can say agriculture is being exploited to generate surplus for the industry. And in some places, it happened more brutally. In other places, England is the historic example. There was a land enclosure movement, and land enclosure movement in the medieval period was a period when land was forcibly occupied by through the state apparatus, and farmers were driven out of the land, and they were pushed into urban areas. So they moved into millions or hundreds and thousands into big cities, totally homeless and poor and miserable. So they could be hired for industrial production at the lowest possible wages and had profits. So this was an attempt to clear the peasantry, clear the countryside from large mass of the peasantry and push them towards cities where they could be employed at low wages or industrialization.
హార్డ్వేర్
And
యూనివర్సిటీలో
and uh,
చదువుకున్నాడు మన దీని గురించి చెప్తాను.
and and do let me know if I'm exceeding the time so that I'll cut down. So you tell me when the 10 minutes are left, and you tell me when the 5 minutes are left.
Of course.
So that strategy was used. In other words, the according to the right wing economic theory, which has been expressed most clearly in one economist, Rostow's book, and which he calls non-communist manifesto, where he puts that there's a traditional society, there are preconditions to take off, and take off then a consumer society. And take off is what is called the industrialization society. And consumer society is what he thinks is the modern society. And he called it a non-communist manifesto because he wanted to compare with what is considered the Marxist or the communist manifesto, that society goes through these stages, uh, you know, primitive communism and slavery and feudalism and capitalism and eventually socialism, the theory of historical materialism. Though this construction of historical materialism is a mechanical, there's nothing in the original Marxist text where it shows in this fashion. But there was this in the left wing tradition, that capitalism is superior to feudalism because capitalism generates industrialization, and industrialization creates working class, and working class will be the agent of the revolution. So proletariat was considered as the harbinger of the revolution, which Marx called the you know uh, um, grave diggers of capitalism. That the expanding capitalism naturally leads to expansion of the working class, and when the majority of the population is working class, they are going to overthrow this system of property, and which is the capitalist property, and overtake. And that's what he called communism. And that's why he pinned his hopes on England, because this was the first country in the world to go through industrialization. And but history does not move in this fashion. And I will come back to this, that Marx also had doubts about this in the later in the last years of his life, and I will come back to that in a minute. But what I want to say is that the right-wing view, which I mentioned about Rastos, which is accepted by all developmental economists, right-wing developmental economists, and some of those people don't even recognize this as the right wing. They think that this is what economic transition means. That economies have to move from agriculture to industry, industry to services, and in the left-wing tradition, it became more dominant after the Soviet Revolution in 1917, which wasn't a traditional, which wasn't a revolution according to the Marxist theory. And that's why Antonio Gramsci called the Bolshevik Revolution revolt against capital, you know. And it's not that he was criticizing the socialist revolution, but he was saying that does not fit in the logic of capital that taking place in a country which is predominantly a peasant country. And the conditions of the Soviet Union, the condition of the socialist revolution, and the Soviet Union, which was being built up, had an over exaggerated influence on left wing thinking on the relationship between agriculture and industry, because it was believed that Soviet Union have had to industrialize very, very quickly in order to create a working class which will defend socialism. And especially when the socialism was, when the socialist revolution was isolated, because there were expectations that once the revolution takes place in Russia, it will spread to Germany, which was the most advanced country at that time. And once Germany has a revolution, it will spread to other parts. But that did not happen for various reasons. And the revolution was isolated. And of course, Stalin developed a theory out of this socialism in one country, that okay, we have to build in one country, we have to abandon the idea of, you know, of spreading socialism in other countries. And by the time Lenin died, the bureaucracy had again come back to power. So, the Soviet revolution had gone into retrogression. It was becoming increasingly bureaucratized, repressive. And by the end of the 1920s, it had become extremely repressive. Stalin had liquidated all political opponents, and so much so that all the members of the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party, which had brought the revolution, they were liquidated, except Trotsky, who escaped to Mexico, and eventually Stalin got him also assassinated later on. So once he had complete control over the party and the state, in the 1930s, he started this plan of collectivization of agriculture and industrialization, in which he presented the peasantry as kulaks, as anti-progress, and liquidation of the peasantry took place on an enormous scale. Peasantry was, there was a massive assassination of farmers in the name of, curbing the kulaks. But it was not the kulaks, it was small farmers who were being liquidated, small farmers whose food was being taken away to the cities in order to feed what they were calling the expanding working class. And there are stories of the farmers were so outraged that they knew that they will rather kill their animal stock rather than give it to the state. And there were large scale killing of animals, even chickens and horses, and so on and so forth. It was very, very brutal. I mean, one of the most brutal kind of industrialization which took place, and that has over dominated the conception of the left also in general, um, and without taking into account that it was a brutal one. And that's why lots of people still keep on worshipping Stalin without understanding that how brutal, and that has given such a bad name to socialism, especially in the advanced capitalist countries, that socialism is equated to Stalinism. And the democratic section of the population, section of the middle class, etc., even section of the middle working class, they're outraged by that. This is what socialism means. We don't want that kind of socialism. It gave a death blow to socialism, and even in the advanced capitalist countries. In the developing countries, they still thought that okay, Soviet Union has become industrialized, and Soviet Union was able to make a propaganda, unless it was exposed during Khrushchev's debate in the 1950s. Mao Zedong did try to develop a different theory, that in the developing countries, this thesis doesn't hold, that we have to go through industrialization, and the working class has to be the agent of the revolution. He didn't abandon it completely, because that would have meant questioning what was considered as the standard classical Marxism. And as I will say that there was actually no classical Marxism. Marx himself was doubtful. I'll come back to that in a minute. And so he argued the peasantry can be a revolutionary class. And the Chinese Revolution was led by the peasantry, and it achieved success, of course, even with some help from the urban areas. But even the Maoist revolution has also degenerated. We all know that, and in the 1970s, Deng, moved toward the same logic of industrialization. And now China is one of the most powerful industrialized countries in the world. And it's not a socialist country. It's a very totalitarian regime. There's no democracy, and even inequalities are massively increasing. And there was a reaction against this in Cambodia, what we call the um, um, Khmer Rouge, who kind of went the other way around. They said that it's the urban population which is our enemy, and they took it to the other extreme. And the whole Khmer Rouge movement was liquidation of the urban civilizations, urban populations, and you know just the opposite of Stalinist liquidation. It was the opposition liquidation of the urban intellectuals, urban working classes, urban civilization, even signs of urban civilization, which is also complete mad, and that's not the point about making a transition. And but this has kind of stayed on, that this is the path to uh, uh, um, economic progress, that industrialization has to take place. And if for the purpose of industrialization, agriculture has to be squeezed. This word squeezed was actually used in the debates on industrialization in Soviet Union. Bukharin was the only one. There were other people, but he was the leading of who did oppose this, who did not try to argue that agriculture should be protected, and there should be reasonable income in the agriculture sector. And he was saying that prosperity of the agriculture sector does not go against industry, because the peasantry is prosperous or reasonably income, they will buy industrial goods, and that will give a push to industrialization. But in the inner party struggle, Stalin liquidated Bukharin also. So but this idea that economic progress goes towards industrialization has stayed on with the large part of the left all over the world. And so very interestingly, that despite the difference in the right wing and the left wing, there is a unity on this, that we need economic growth, and economic growth comes through industrialization and making a transition towards the service sector, and agriculture has to be squeezed. Now, this has now let me briefly go before I go on to the next topic. Say that Marx in his last years was rethinking about this. He was rethinking because of the correspondence he had with Vera Zasulich, who was a socialist, feminist, anarchist, Narodnik, some people would call it, who wrote to Marx that your vision of socialism, communism, historical progress means that every society has to pass through capitalism. But is it necessary that in Russia we have agrarian communities, which use the word mir? Meant agrarian communities, which are collective in nature, which cooperate in production, in distribution, maintenance of communities. Can't they directly go over to socialism? And very interestingly, Marx responded to that, saying, yes, that's possible. That Russia, Russia's agrarian communities don't have to go through industrialization and go through capitalism. But then he cut it out and made another draft, saying that no, unfortunately, the pain of capitalism has to be borne. They have to go through uh, capitalism. Then he cut out that draft also and produced a third draft. All those evidence is available, Vera Zastulich. But that shows that he was rethinking about this, that not every society has to pass through this transition, which has become the mantra of many of the left, that capitalism is inevitable, transition from so-called pre-capitalism to capitalism is inevitable, and that is necessary, even even if it's brutal, even if it's leads to murders and liquidation of the peasantry. It is necessary for historical progress. That belief and that mythical historical progress, makes some people totally immune to the this transition, uh, which has taken place in some countries where peasantry has been liquidated.
We just have 10 more
And
minutes.
so, what I want to emphasize is that Marx's own thinking was much more complex. He knew about capitalism, leading to decline in soil fertility, how use of fertilizers and so on and so forth can damage food, and it leads to rupture. And that has been theorized by a number of people now, that how this rupture needs to be captured, and rift which takes place, between human beings and nature, and capitalism facilitates that rift between human beings and nature.
Just very
And
quickly, we just
yeah.
have 10 minutes left.
Okay, good, thank you for letting me know. So next I want to move to this, that we are now in the era of global climate change. So all questions of transition of agriculture, industry, services must be relooked, and Marxism should not be seen in a frozen sense. Those who keep on talking about agriculture to industry and the industrial working class are actually slave of what I would call a frozen Marxism, which is actually contrary to the Marxist tradition. Marxism is a dynamic theory which deals with new situations. And I would say two important things about global climate change. One is global warming, and there is biodiversity loss. Global warming is already happening at a scale which is even more than what we anticipated. For example, in the year 2023, global temperature on an average throughout the world, on an average, which doesn't mean everywhere, but on average, has risen by 1.5 degrees centigrade compared with the pre-industrial age. And this is a unanimous opinion of the international committee constituted by the UNO, that if, and which was agreed in the 2015 Paris Agreement, that if the average global temperature rises by more than 1.5 degrees centigrade compared with the pre-industrial age, by 2030, we will be nearing the tipping age, where the environmental changes will be irreversible. There will be devastating environmental changes of floods, cyclones, droughts, and all kinds of disease, death of animals, and so on and so forth. So that's already taken place. It doesn't necessarily mean that 2024 would also have 1.5 degrees centigrade. It might not. There might be some change in that. But that tells you that the degree of climate change through global warming is so uh, uh, visible. And the global warming manifests through floods, through droughts, through massive snowfalls, and which mean that the climate has changes. One, the intensity of global climate change is massive. For example, floods, which earlier took place, which were earlier maybe 1 inch flooding, it might take 5 inch flooding. And the frequency, that if such a flooding earlier took place once in 10 years or once in 50 years, now it's taking place every second year. So both the things, and some parts are affected in the reverse, in the drought taking place in parts of Australia, parts of America, and obviously massively in Africa. So one is that. Other is biodiversity loss, that there's a massive amount of species which are being lost. And that's not an emotional and sentimental thing about some animals and birds being lost, because there is an ecological balance in nature. And when some species are lost, it has a multiplier effect on the other species, including on human beings. So both the things are happening. So in this era, to keep on holding on to old and what I say frozen Marxist views is misplaced. And we also need to criticize bourgeois economic theory about economic growth. The kind of economic growth uh, we would propose. And when I say we, I'm talking about a new kind of Marxism, which is eco-socialism, ecological socialism. That socialism is no longer socialism in this era if it's not informed by ecology. Okay, because ecological destruction means social destruction. Okay, ecological destruction does not remain just destruction of trees destruction of animals. It is human destruction. It leads to devastation of human beings. It leads to death of animals and various species. And COVID is one expression of that, because when this penetration of human beings keeps on taking place in all spheres, then they get in touch with the other species which they are not supposed to be in touch with. In this case, it was baits in China, from which disease spread to others. And this is not the only virus. There'll be even more deadly virus. So we need to capture this point, which I want to emphasize. That's in this era of global climate change, we cannot keep on repeating old theories. We need to re-look at previous theories. And re-looking at the previous theory means that destruction of agriculture is destruction of nature. That we need to think about new system of farming. And old style view that there can be large scale capitalist farming or large scale collective farms is suicidal, because those large scale farms, they are mechanized, they emit more carbon dioxide emissions, they contribute more to global warming, and they also lead to massive destruction of species. Because a small farmer, when he or she does farming, he or she is aware of every little part of the land. They nurture the land. They know the species. They know plants. But when 1,000-acre farm is being liquidated, it's indiscriminate. So that actually contributes both to higher emissions as well as to higher biodiversity loss. So so now you might say that even if we adopt this idea of eco-socialist view of agriculture and protection of agriculture as important, and reject those theories which demand destruction of agriculture, how does one look upon the farmers' movement now? Now, the farmers' movement may not be consciously eco-socialist, but farmers have recognized that protection of agriculture is important to them for their food, for their culture, for their civilization. There was one word which was quite often used during the farmers' movement called hond. Hond is a Punjabi word which means existence. That our exist It's an existential threat. That those farm laws were not simply economic laws; they were existential threat. That our entire way of life will be totally destroyed. And so they understood instinctively from their own experience that this will lead to destruction. And that's why agricultural laborers also joined, and some people are saying that, Dalit farmers were forced into this. It is nonsense. The agricultural labor organization knew that then massive mechanization take place, they'll be displaced, they'll be unemployed. So they saw their own material interests in joining the farmers movement. But this does not mean that one can remain complacent. One has to put forward this view more clearly in the farmers movement. And it's possible that there are large farmers who are in league with agro-business corporations, though I'm doubtful, because even the large farmers are also scared that eventually big corporate capital is so powerful that even a 200-acre farm or even 300-acre farm is nothing in compare with the billions of dollars and the economic power of the big multinational corporation. So the farmers movement has to be supported, and any opposition to this, especially from the left, is misguided. And in the context of India, it is even more important that this is the only movement which has been able to checkmate the BJP. That's one reason they are employing so repressive measures against the resurgence of the farmers' movement, that they're not even allowing Punjab farmers to enter the Haryana, and Haryana is ruled by BJP. Totally unconstitutional that the national highways being, and in a ruthless fashion, farmers have been killed, tear gas through drones have been used over them, and the government is mortified that if the farmers movement emerges, because the elections are near the corner, and we will have a huge mass movement which will again generate more support and opposition to BJP, and we might be defeated. So they want to crush it. Now, there are internal issues in the farmers movement. Why did they take the decision? There was some discussion in the farmers movement that we should not launch this movement at this stage because the government will misuse it. They'll try to, polarize. They'll try to portray that this movement is led by Khalistanis, and like the Indira, after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi used this argument against the Sikhs to come into power. Similarly, Modi government, its earlier anti-Muslim rhetoric will be actually, overtaken by rhetoric against Palestine, and whip up Hindu nationalism in the country and win the elections. So, more more wise and more matured organizations. But this group which has led the struggle had differences with them. There are internal issues, but right now they are camping there and they're getting some support. But the other farmers organization which did not join them have also extended them support. For example, the Red Roko Morcha is being supported by other farmers organization. So despite all these doubts, despite all these reservations about the timing of this farmers struggle, it has to be supported. And in principle, it is very right to say that we demand MSP because that will, ensure some assured income to the farmers, maintainability of the small farmers and the middle farmers, and they are the majority of the farmers. Big farmers are a very small component of farmers. And if you compare with the European American farmers, even the big farmers are not big farmers. And
Okay.
very briefly, in Europe, the situation is slightly different.
Sorry to interrupt.
But one thing is common, that in Europe, the farmers are saying that the bureaucrats in the European Union who construct the laws, they have no understanding of farming. None of them has even spent one night in a village, and they are imposing certain environmental standards on them, and they don't understand how we have to implement, how difficult. So
Oh,
farmers are not actually opposed to environmental measures, but they are opposed to imposition of those environmental measures.
sorry to
And that is
interrupt.
being exploited by saying that farmers are opposed to green transition. They are not opposed to
Just
green
very
transition.
quickly, you just a
Yes.
few minutes left, so time to
Okay. So I'll
yes.
conclude by saying this, that farmers movement is a hugely progressive movement, politically, economically, socially, culturally, and we need to support them. And any misgivings on the part of the left are misplaced based on wrong understanding. And most importantly, that the farmers' movement must be looked in the perspective of the new vision of eco-socialism, of protection of agriculture, protection of farming communities. That's very absolutely essential to protect the ecology and protect this planet. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Pritam ji.
Thank you very much. That was very, very informative. Okay, so now we have some time to take some questions from people. The easiest thing to do is to put your questions in the chat, in the meeting chat, and I will read them out. We have already got one here right now. This is quite long. Well, actually, there's a comment left here, but I will read the question out. How do you think the agenda of land reforms and land to the tiller can be brought to light?
Yeah, and this is a good question. And we have to be strategic in dealing with this question, that land reforms or land to the tiller or land to marginalized communities is not an issue which can be brought now. Okay. And there is a time and occasion for every issue. To 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 raise up this issue will be a divisive issue at this moment, because this will split the farmers movement. And what we need to do is to keep the unity, and once this movement has able to succeed, and hopefully it will succeed in one form or the other. If it doesn't succeed, then lots of terrible things are going to happen. If BJP comes to power and is able to suppress, and that's an entirely different issue, we can't predict that, then we do need to engage with farmers organization. Okay. And that is a serious debate which need to take place within farmers organization. But this issue cannot be put in front right now in order to discredit farmers organization, that these people are not bringing the question of land reforms. Land reform is not an issue at this moment. The land to the tiller is not an issue at this moment, but it needs to be brought into the debate. Howsoever this a movement for minimum support price achieves success or doesn't achieve success.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's another question that was just posed before. How do you look at the fact that landless peasantry and agricultural laborers are dialectically linked with the landowning peasantry in a relationship of exploitation?
Um, well, yes, that landless workers and agriculture workers, it's the same thing, you know. Their relationship with the farming communities is multiple. It's not simply of exploitation. Um, Especially with the small and middle peasantry, because some of the small and middle peasants are so small. 86% of India's farms, India taking it as a whole, are less than 2.5 hectares, less than 5 acres, and almost 50% are actually less than 2 acres. So I mean, in what sense one can call them? They are semi-proletarianized. Their existence is, many of them actually are not able to earn their livelihood only by farming, working on the farm. They're also workers. They do part-time work in some areas, either in the semi-urban spaces or even in the village, selling milk and so on and so forth. So to posit that, you know, farmers is one class and agricultural labor is one class is again falling into the trap of BJP agenda at this stage, that it's wrong. But this is an issue which need to be brought into the farmers movement seriously. But again, this is not the time and space.
Okay, thank you for answering that. Now I have a question myself, but before then I'll just let everybody else know that if you would like to ask a question verbally instead of putting it in the chat, please press the button where you can raise your hand. So there should be a reactions button that should be on your Zoom screen. If you can just click that and raise your hand, and it should say raise hand, then I can bring you up on the screen and you can ask a question. Okay, so I had a question in regarding the green transition and climate change, because one of the things that I've been noticing over the last few years is that capitalist governments have been pushing the green transition from in their own context, but it's clearly it's something that is being pushed in a way to try to get working people to accept lower living standards. And another aspect is sometimes when there has been a breakdown in infrastructure, and of course, some of it is climate related, but in other instances, you can see that capitalist governments have just not invested in infrastructure properly, or it has not been maintained. And so instead of accepting some of the fault, they're blaming everything on climate change. And I've noticed that this is something, when I've spoken with working class people about this, they're able to recognize that any type of green transition under a capitalist system, or at least in the society we live in today, they automatically say, oh, they'll force us to pay for it. They won't pay for it. So how can we address something like this, where working class people will get turned off by some of these policies when they can see that it's them who is being forced to pay for it?
Yeah. Um, and the answer to this is manifold. One, that most strategists in capitalism are able to understand that global climate change is real, it's threatening, and it can be threatening to capitalism itself. So they are trying to see that whether we can have actually green capitalism, that whether capitalism is capable of adjusting to a green transition, but they do not want to deal with the question of social inequalities. And that's where eco-socialism comes. That they think that there is a possibility that we might be able to have a green transition without changing the structure of property, without changing the structure of income distribution, and we can affect that green transition. Now, that is fatally flawed, because green transition cannot take place unless a mass of the population also supports that. And the mass of the population will only support that if they're able to see that there is there is uh, interest in that they are able to have a better standard of living, more better quality of products, better quality of air, better form of transportation, and that can only come through working class struggles. Now, this is slowly and gradually getting into the consciousness of the working class, because many working class organizations for example, trade unions, in the beginning, try to organize that, we are not going to dismantle nuclear industry, because if we dismantle nuclear industry, we will lose jobs. We are not going to agree to dismantle armament industry, because if we dismantle armament industry, we will lose our jobs. Their main concern was jobs, and one can't blame them that they're concerned. But gradually, the trade unions are recognizing that if we actually make a green transition within the economy, there are new jobs which can be created. There are green jobs which can be created. That greening the economy would require green plumbers, green carpenters, green transport workers, green electricians, and there are million jobs. For example, British trade unions have launched a movement called 1 million jobs. That how green transition will require green retrofitting of the economy. And I want to emphasize that those reforms under capitalism, even if they're under capitalism, should be supported by the eco-socialists. The reason is that if capitalism is green, then the socialism which will come from that will be also green. If capitalism is dirty, socialism which will come from that will be also dirty. And the example is Soviet Union is there. That Soviet Union was a highly authoritarian society. Okay, there was no democratic traditions. It hadn't gone through that democratic tradition. So socialist revolution came, but within few years it also became undemocratic, authoritarian. So there is a continuing link between the Tsar and Stalin and the Putin, that they represent this authoritarian tendency. So therefore, from an eco-socialist point of view, we argue that capitalism is not capable of greening the economy fundamentally, because capital is based on profitability, and capital looks upon all forms of nature as exploitable, whether it's land, whether it's water, whether it's forests, whether it's mines. Its interest is to make profitability. So there is a fundamental contradiction between capital and environment. Capital is opposed to prevention of environmental destruction. The capitalist expansion will automatically lead to environmental destruction. So it's fundamentally, but that does not mean that we do not support reforms under capitalism. And these reforms can be at the level of industry, it can be a level of transportation. For example, in improving public transportation and discouraging car transportation, or putting heavy duties on air transportation, because air transport is one of the primary contributors to climate change. So if those transitions take place, cycling is encouraged, special allowances are given to people who use bicycles, and cars are made more expensive. And though I can say something about the electric cars, that they are not a panacea. Electric cars are also a problem because they create waste. And though I think you might have to organize another discussion, why how can a green transition take place, because that includes intervention at the level of state, intervention level of the locality, intervention level of families and individuals, how individuals have a role to play in the eco-socialist transition. I've written a paper. I'll send you a link on this, that how individuals have a role to play in this eco-socialist transition, which has been neglected in the old socialist theory. Old socialist theory only deals with mass struggle and mass movements, mass demonstration. It does not equally take into account that how individuals in our everyday life have a role to play in this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. We have another question that has come in. Um, this one is from Abdul. It asks, if the minimum support price increase, the urban working class will suffer the price hike. You said the PDS system will fulfill their needs. Is it possible or sufficient in a country? If not, how about the poor working class? So just asking about the minimum support price, if it increased, and how will it impact the urban working class?
Yeah, the as I said earlier, that this idea that minimum support price will lead to rise in prices of food, and it's the urban working class will suffer, does not take into account that the prices at which the food will be sold to poor people, and when I say poor, I think substantial section of the urban working class comes into this. If there are section of the working class who might be called working class, but they are living middle and urban middle class standard, then they're obviously not going to be covered. They will be affected, and the rise in food prices. And but large section of the working class will not be affected because the food has to be provided through public distribution system, and the public distribution system is being strengthened even by the BJP government. That the number of people who are eligible to access the food through public distribution system has increased, and in the percentage is enormous. I don't have the exact figure here in front of me, and the absolute figure is something like 86 crores or something, and which means that people who are eligible to this. So this is a misplaced emphasis that to put this as a form of a question, that if a minimum support price rises, it leads to food prices, and the urban working class will suffer. The section of the urban working class who are entitled to public distribution system will not suffer. They will get the prices at which the public distribution system fixes up the prices.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Hello.
S-
Hello.
Is that someone that would like to ask a question?
Hello. I am Rao. Pritam ji. Uh, uh, it is said to be a present moment. I mean about present moment, considering the real class nature of this moment. It is not clear which class the present moment belongs to. In fact, some argue that it should be called rich peasants movement. I mean, some of the people are arguing like this. Uh, is it true that only this present farmers movement belongs to rich farmers only?
No, this is totally misplaced. Rich farmers do not face police bullets. They don't have the capacity to stay on one place for many days with very little food and facing the hardships. This movement is primarily small and middle farmers, and who are used to living a hard life on the farms, who work in on their farms. They don't live a life of comfort which might be associated with the rise of rich peasantry. This is totally misplaced idea that it is led by the rich peasants and it is controlled by the rich peasants. Rich peasants, which rich peasant do you find there? Do you think Badals go there, Chotalas go there? They can't even spend one day in those camps and participate in those. It is the small and the middle farmers. And the middle farmers are what? Middle farmers are those who have 5 to 7 acres of land. Okay. And they are not prosperous. 86%, as I said, of the farmers in this country are small farmers. And they are the ones who are protesting. They are the ones who are sacrificing. They are the ones who are facing police bullets. It's not the rich farmers. It is totally misconceived.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, so far, those are the questions we have gotten. I'll give people a few more minutes just to come up with your last. Oh, we have one right now. Why is the farmers movement divided?
Yeah, the division in the farmers movement is for two reasons. One, the some ideological differences, but sometimes personal egos as well. And third, that some of the farmers' organizations are aligned with some political parties. And so let me deal with all the 3 points. That the first part, ideological differences, that some organizations, farmers' organizations, are broadly left. Okay, when I say broadly left, they might be associated with the some of the Maoist groups, or some with the CPM, some with the CPI. Some of the farmers' organizations are more efficient, they are more religious in nature, and they think that the leftists are communists, they are atheists, but they have worked together now and find that the misconceptions about each other have been removed. Similarly, the left and the left farmers organization have seen that how this religiously motivated organization, they are the ones who provided langar. They are the ones who are able to mobilize people. They are the people who provided great motivation and the strength to strength. So there's a need for unity between different ideological currents. So that's one reason. The second is sometimes personal egos do come into the picture. That if Balbir Singh Rajewal emerges as the topmost leader, some other smaller leaders start feeling jealous, and this happens in every movement. And in this case, this recent resurgence which was launched is actually a product of that, that they wanted to show that we are the real fighters, and we are going to stay. They did not hold discussions with the other farmers movement organizations who were saying that probably it's not the right time, that this launching a movement at this time, government will not allow us to go. Last time government wasn't aware, so we were able to reach. This time they are aware, and they will construct, they will put hurdles, not only put hurdles, they will unleash so much repression that it might lead to demoralization of the farmers movement. So they were reluctant to use this. But obviously these two groups is led by Daliwal and Pandher, and they went ahead. But the other farmers organization did not adopt a sectarian attitude. They said, okay, even if we did not agree with their timing, once they're suffering repression, we will be with them. So they are supporting in rail roko agitation and other forms, extending support to them, in all other ways. So there is that element also about personal egos playing a role and trying to have upmanship, and this happens in all struggles.
Thank you for that. We have another question that's come in. It is asking, why is the movement, the farmers' movement, limited to Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, UP? Why not in other states? What is your opinion?
Yeah, that's because the farm laws which were brought, which were aimed at abolishing minimum support price, the directly affected farmers were in this region. Because if probably you would know that when the so-called green revolution, which is actually not green, it is the most ungreen revolution, when it was launched in the 1960s, it was launched in a period of drought in the country. In 1964-65, there was a massive drought in the country, and there was a fear of food shortages, and food riots had taken place in Calcutta. The central government was extremely worried about food riots taking place, and they also said that this might lead to communist revolution. Because there was example of China in 1949, which is only 17, 18 years before that, and there were those fears. And before that, America was supplying food aid under public law 480, and America was now trying to kind of twist the arms of Indian government. So the Indian government launched this in emergency situation. I've written a book called Federalism, Nationalism and Development, India and the Punjab economy, where I have discussed in great detail, where Indira Gandhi said it was a question of national survival to have as much output, food output, and in so short a time as much, as possible. C. Subramaniam, who was the architect of the Green Revolution, he also said that it was a question of national survival, and similarly, other policy planners, I've given all their quotations in my book, detailed investigation. So it was the Indian nationalist vision that one cannot call one country or one nation to be independent if it's not have sufficient food. Okay, and the Indian independence was still in the mind of the Indian political leadership, because obviously it was only about 17, 18 years before India became independent. That you cannot say that you are an ex-colonial country, an independent country, if you're still. So we have to become food self-sufficient. So they chose regions in the country which could actually lead to a rise in food production. And that led to not only Punjab and Haryana, but other parts. But in other parts, it was selected. For example, Palghar district in Kerala, Burdwan district in Bengal, East and West Godavari districts in Andhra Pradesh, Western UP and UP, Northern Haryana in Haryana. But the whole of Punjab was the only state where the whole of Punjab was used for green revolution. The reason was that the peasantry of Punjab was used to irrigation technique, because this green revolution strategy required one, irrigation resources, and secondly peasantry who's familiar with irrigations patterns and use of water and irrigation. The Punjab peasantry was, because during the colonial period, the colonial government has constructed huge canals in Punjab, especially in Western Punjab, which is now gone to Pakistan. And the peasantry of the Eastern Punjab was, made to migrate there, and they were given huge parts of land in that area. And they were said that if you join the army, after leaving the army, you will be given land in that places. So the recruitment into the army and ensuring good agriculture production was linked up. And increasing in agriculture production during the colonial regime was seen as a way of increasing the land revenue. And increasing the land revenue meant in improving the revenue position of the colonial administration, which was then used to, you know, fund the army and use the army to conquer other parts of the world. So this peasantry was very familiar with irrigation techniques, and Punjab has a flat land and it had long tradition of irrigation. The whole of Punjab was. Therefore, it is not surprising that when the three farm laws suggested that minimum support price will be abolished, they were the ones who were directly affected. Of course, northern Haryana was also affected. Parts of UP where green revolutionary, they were also affected. So it's nothing surprising about this that they led. But as I said, that when the farmers movement emerged, farmers, even in the remote corner of the country, came to know for the first time that they're MSP, and they started demanding that our crops should also be. That's why this present resurgence movement is saying that MSP should be for all the crops that they are insisting. The government is trying to bribe them by saying that we will give you MSP on not only on wheat and rice, but we will extend it to pulses, we'll extend it to cotton and so on and so forth. But they are sticking on this that we want for all crops in order to build all India unity.
Great, thank you. Thank
Well,
you very much. Sorry.
Aishwarya,
Yes.
yeah, I have another question.
Yes, please go.
Yeah, that is, I mean, can we consider the present farmers movement? Can we consider the present farmers movement not only an economic movement, but also a democratic movement against the growing danger of dictatorship?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the central point that this is the only movement which the government could not crush, and the government had to swallow its pride, and the Modi had to, who was known to not change his mind once he has taken a decision, and many people feared that this will lead to crackdown and so on and so forth, and he was forced to withdraw. He was humiliated in having to go to the parliament to pass the laws, and then only farmers agreeing to this. So it strengthened the democratic forces. And this farmers movement, in many ways, some section of the farmers movement is quite advanced. They celebrated International Women's Day on the morcha, where the farmers movement was there. They also supported the demand for the release of political prisoners, the intellectuals who been they were trying to link up with the larger democratic struggles. So it is strengthens the democratic struggle of the people. It will inspire other sections of the population. And the thing is that unlike other agitations, for example, agitation by government employees or teachers or railway workers, those those struggles, those agitations fizzle out. Either the government is able to give them some concessions, make some demands, or able to suppress them, and it goes. Farmers movement is not going to go away. It's a civilizational struggle. It is a struggle between urban oriented elites trying to crush peasantry, and this is not going to happen. This is whether the new whatever new government comes into power, even if the Congress government comes into power, there will be struggles. So farmers movement is here to stay, and strengthening this is the strongest possible way of encouraging dissent, different viewpoints, different the right to protest, right to organize, and right to oppose government policies, and therefore through that process strengthen the democratic culture. Absolutely important.
Thank you for that. We have a few more questions. What do you say to the role of small peasants and agricultural laborers in this struggle?
Well, I already mentioned that
Oh, and
the
sorry,
agricultural laborers.
sorry, just one word. I'll just add to this question as well, particularly the proletariat. My question is, what would their role be in this struggle?
You mean rural proletariat or the urban proletariat? I mean,
Both.
I've already dealt with the urban proletariat, but when a question was posed about the rise in prices and its effect on the urban working class.
Oh, the
But the rural
rural,
proletariat
yeah.
is the rural landless workers, you know, and rural workers. I'm saying that the people who are called farmers or the peasants, they're almost semi-proletarian. They have very small plots of land. So it is a misplaced kind of vision, which thinks that landless farmers are one, and landowning farmers. Landowning farmers are marginal farmers. Large number of them are marginal farmers. They are not able to support themselves from that small piece of land because of the prices of their products which being low, and they can only sustain. And if they expand, then the opportunities for wages also improve for the landless proletariat. So their conflicts are not contradictory. There are tensions. They're not similar, but they're not contradictory to each other in such a way that you can oppose them one against the other.
Yes, thank you. Now we have another question from Kusum. Do you think the Green Revolution was the only way to tackle the food crisis in India during the 60s? Wasn't it an imperialist tool to promote dependency of India on foreign capital rather than self sufficiency? That's a good question.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was imperialist conspiracy, but there was another dimension that agrochemical corporations had developed hugely, massively in America, and also seed innovation firms. So they were quite happy that this technology was being adopted, and the green revolution was actually at that stage to with this with the objective of food self-sufficiency, was opposed to American dominance. America did want India to remain dependent upon food aid, and through food aid, use the diplomatic and other measures to change the India's foreign policy. So food self-sufficiency was a desirable outcome that time, but we did not know the environmental implication and the social implication. And the environmental and social implication of this green revolution has been that environmentally destructive and socially unequal. It has led to increase in inequalities. So the target of food self-sufficiency has been met. And that's why there is a resentment in Punjab that we have contributed to food self-sufficiency, but we are the ones who are subjected to repression at every stage. That the recognition of the Punjab farmers and to some extent of the Haryana farmers to the achievement of the self-sufficiency is not recognized. We are not being given back.
Yes, okay, thank you. Um, so far we don't have any more questions right now. I do have one again. So this one is pertaining to the concept that has come around, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, is degrowth. So, are you familiar? Have you heard of the degrowth?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes. What I just wanted to ask was, maybe if we can explain it to the audience, what exactly is degrowth
yeah,
and
yeah,
what are the origins of it? Yeah.
yeah. Well, the idea of degrowth has obviously come from the green movement. And the idea is that what we need at this stage to protect the planet and the people is not more growth. We need equitable distribution. That if the incomes are equitably distributed, everyone can have a decent standard of living. Everyone can have a home. Everyone can have good access to food. Everyone can have a good access to transportation. It is the unequal distribution which is a problem, not the uh, fact that there is not enough growth. And the idea of growth is used by the ruling elites in order to hoodwink the people that your conditions will improve. For example, in India, this trickle down theory was used when neoliberal reforms were introduced. That if we have economic growth, eventually trickle down effect will emerge. And now even the IMF and the World Bank are recognizing this. That trickle down effect does not take place because this growth has been captured by larger people. It has the benefits of growth gone to a small section of the population. And therefore, the idea is that Earth does not have unlimited capacity to keep on using it indefinitely. That there are environmental, ecological limits to growth, that any more growth, once it goes beyond these ecological limits, it will boomerang on us, that it will lead to pollution, and pollution then affects the resources. If there's a pollution affects the land, pollution affects the water, but therefore that water is not useful for irrigation, water is not useful for consumption, That's why, even in villages now, water is being sold through bottled water because water has become so polluted, and the land becomes infertile because if it's polluted. So therefore, the idea that we should keep on having growth is flawed. We have entered a stage in human history where more growth will be damaging. But I will add a qualification to this. This idea of degrowth is absolutely sensible for advanced capitalist economies. They really do not need any more growth. But this is not strictly applicable to developing countries, because in developing countries still you need some growth which is required because there are basic needs which have not been fulfilled. That there are not enough schools, there are not enough hospital clinics, and therefore, basic necessities have not been. Though many of these basic necessities can also be fulfilled by more equitable distribution in these countries. Cuba is an example. Cuba is not a very rich country, but it's more egalitarian. Almost 100% access to health, and life expectancy is better there. And though I have not say that Cuba is an ideal society, in Cuba also there are very repressive political structures, and we need to keep on criticizing this to strengthen uh, 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 socialism in a democratic way, because we must not abandon the idea of socialism being democratic and ecologically compatible. Okay, so I would say that qualified opposition, qualified support to the idea of degrowth. That degrowth is absolutely essential in the advanced capitalist economies. There's no need for more economic growth. In fact, there's not only no need, in fact, economic growth will be dangerous, in the way it is carried on. We need more distributive measures. And that's why the idea of eco-socialism. But in the developing countries, we need economic growth, but that growth which is sustainable from an environmental point of view. And there could be new forms of energy, new forms of transportation, new forms of consumption which need to be encouraged in order for that growth not to be environmentally damaging and not to be damaging to people's health.
Thank you for that. Now we have another question from Rajamohan. Do you think transition to industrialization is inevitable and that the farmers have to move on, have to move?
No, it's not inevitable. It's a conscious decision, and conscious decision partly misinformed by theory, as I said earlier, both the right wing and the left wing, and it is even more unfortunate when the left wing adopts the right wing ideology of in favor of industrialization. And we could think of a society where this rural urban differences do not emerge in this way, where urban societies must be restructured, where there might be agriculture, farming even in so-called cities, where people grow vegetables and fruits in their small, you know gardens, and then on their rooftops. And this division between rural and urban has to be actually abolished. So not only industrialization is not inevitable, industrialization will be extremely dangerous. It will finish this planet and the people.
Hello,
you.
Pritam ji.
Yeah.
Is there any relation between the degrowth and socialism?
Yes, eco-socialists argue for degrowth for advanced capitalist countries. Though there are some difference of opinion among the eco-socialists, what degree of equal growth, and that we need unequal, unbalanced growth. That some industries need to grow. For example, renewable industry need to grow, public transportation need to grow, railway industry need to grow, but car industry need to decline, defense industry need to decline, nuclear industry need to decline. So we need to have a more disaggregated view of degrowth. But it is believed that the eco-socialists agree on that more growth is dangerous, and therefore eco-socialists must not be wedded. That's why green parties, they might have smaller influence, but they are the ones who are openly able to say this, that we are not standing there to say that when we come to power, we will increase growth and we will increase. They are saying that we will have environmentally compatible growth, but not unlimited growth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question. And thank you for responding. Okay, so far we don't have any more questions at the moment. I can give it a few minutes for people to gather their thoughts. So far the questions have been incoming. Anybody
What
have
I
any?
will do is
Yes.
I'll send you copies of some of my papers which I've written on this, and that might further clarify both on the idea of eco-socialism and criticism of the farm laws and the farmers' movement in Europe and India.
That would be very helpful if you could. I think that this is one of those questions where uh, we've seen the farmers movement, but the fact that now that it's very much globally connected, and I think this is something to maybe expand a bit on, is the political spectrum where the farmers' protests fall. Because in India, we've seen it to be very much tied to the left,
Yeah.
whereas Europe-wide, I think that's especially where we're seeing a lot of it. They're not particularly going towards the left.
Well, the when we say left and right in the West, it means slightly differently than the way we see in India. The reason why it is being called it's not left is that since European Union was imposing some environmental standards like decrease in use of fertilizer, also keeping forcing the farmers to keep some land fallow so that forestation can be increased and deforestation can be decreased. The farmers were opposed to this imposition on them. Okay. And it looked like that therefore they are opposed to environmental measures. And some of the right-wing organizations who do not want to take the climate change issue, they supported the farmers. They said that we support the farmers on this, because we must remember that the hardcore right do not even recognize climate change. Trump, for example, thinks that climate change is a hoax. It is a hoax created by China. I mean, he's mad. He just doesn't understand this. And similarly, there are right-wing people who say that we should not bother about climate change. We should have as much growth because their own economic interests are involved in this. Their own businesses are involved in this. And they know that if environmental standards are imposed, some of their businesses will have to bear the cost. So they are opposed to this. So some of the right wingers, out of partly out of ignorance, partly to tap the popular consciousness, even when it is anti-environmental, they have tried to support. But farmers are not. All farmers are not buying this. Farmers understand many of these. So it will be wrong to say that they are not similarly left wing. That is true, but they're opposed to liquidation of the farming. They're opposed to liquidation of agriculture. In that sense, they are already progress. Historically, they are performing a progressive role.
Thank you for that. Okay, we have a few more questions coming in, and just letting everybody know, we have another possibly. So let me just check the time. Another 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes time. So the next question again comes from Rajamohan. What are the differences in the European farmers movement and the Indian farmers movement, and what is the class character? I think you've already answered a bit of the first, but
Yeah. Sorry, what are the different tendencies? Well,
yeah,
I mean,
and the class
there is
character.
there is no each different country has a different problem. Um, for example, in Spain, the drought has meant to reducing the production of certain crops, and the farm incomes are gone, so they are demanding some subsidy. In Belgium, it is the imposition of certain environmental taxes. So each country has a different reason, and but they're all linked up with the downgrading of agriculture, and agricultural policy is not being understood. So one of the democratic demands is that in all framing of agricultural policies, farmers must be included in this. At the moment, it is the urban biased, urban educated, urban settled intellectuals and the technocrats and the bureaucrats who form policies who have no understanding of farming. So that they are questioning that mode of thinking. And in America, farmers feel very defeated. Farmers feel that we have been finished because agro corporations have become so strong. That's why they feel encouraged by Indian farmers movement, that at least in one part of the world, farmers are able to withstand against the, this, powerful corporations, and we have become so powerless. So there is a sympathy with the farmers movement all over the world. There is another movement which you should sometime Lee Campesinia, which is a movement of small farmers in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, which is trying to organize small farmers, provide them an international platform.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have from Kusum. Why was the left opposing green revolution if it was not an imperialist tool? Don't you think that the environmental effects of the high yielding seeds were very much clear at the time the green revolution was imposed on India?
Well, I mean, the left really did not oppose the Green Revolution. The left was skeptical. And when I say skeptical, it is some of the intellectuals like Harry Cleaver wrote a very important article in the Monthly Review where he was saying that Green Revolution is nothing else but an extension of the agrotechnology, agrochemical technology by the corporations in America into the third world. So it is a penetration of agrarian techniques which were adopted in America into the third world. And so some of the left wing people were critical of that, but the full implication the environment implications were not seen. I mean, there was one book written in the 60s, which did talk about this, that what are these seeds, what are these chemicals, what are these pesticides, but full scale implications of this were not seen. It is only now when we see that Punjab, which has the highest green revolution, where water is polluted, land is polluted, there is a spread of cancer, and there's one train which takes cancer patients from Punjab to Rajasthan, where the cancer hospital. It's called cancer train because every passenger is a cancer patient, and now the full implication of that are being seen now. So when the left section of the left, not all left, many of the left did not pose. They in fact said that it's good that we are ending our reliance on American food aid, and especially those who supported Soviet Union were very happy, that India will become more close to Soviet Union and less dependent on America because of that. And that is the shift which Indira Gandhi also showed. And after 1960s, he became more pro-Soviet, and CPI became very close to the Indira Gandhi, and that's one reason that they even supported the emergency, and eventually they even supported Operation Blue Star. Totally mad kind of politics, and this has harmed the left so much. But so the whole of left wasn't opposed to this, but some element of the left did understand that it was a penetration of agrochemical techniques of farming which are being exported into this.
Thank you for that. We have another question here from Comrade Narendra. Coming to sustainable growth, how is it possible in a system based on the logic of unregulated investment decisions? How are we even how are even transitional measures possible without parallel power structures?
Well, the parallel power structures have to be created. People have to struggle everywhere, at the local level. For example, in Oxford, the Green Party is reasonably strong, and that's because people have organized, students, employees, workers. They've organized, and they have been able to prevent the use of car in the city center. They have been able to force the city council to construct special cycle lanes to facilitate the use of cycle, and even payment of allowance to employees who use cycle instead of car. So there are measures which have to be implemented. On their own, government will not do that. So the goal of sustainable growth demands mass mobilization, mass pressure, but it's not going to happen in one day, and we should be aware of that. That it's a long drawn out struggle, and it's a strengthening of green oriented political parties or green oriented factions within the existing political parties, which can only ensure this kind of sustained growth. Now, I must also clarify this conception about sustainable growth and sustainability. Some people, when they use the word sustainable growth, they mean that growth which continuously goes on at that level. Okay, that it's 4% growth, which is continuously, therefore that growth is sustainable. That is not a green perspective. The green view of sustainable growth is that growth which does not environmentally damage, which does not damage ecology. It's that growth which is compatible with the uh, 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 which is compatible with nature, which is compatible with ecology. And that means the new kind of industries, new kinds of living, recycling, reuse, public transport, greater use of bicycles, greater reliance on renewable forms, greater support to wind farms, solar energy, and abolishing use of oil, gas, coal, opposition to that. So it has to be through struggles. We are seeing this in Latin America, where in many places they are able